Welcome to 1,001 Ways to Cope with Stress. We have our gifted Egyptologist with us today, Dr. Frederick Munderson, who will be sharing with us a 4-part session on the system of Egyptian kingship. Welcome, Dr.
Yes, good
Munderson. Again, a
afternoon.
pleasure to see you.
Oh, yes, sister. Thank you for welcoming me back.
Yes.
Today, our topic is the system of Egyptian kingship. And as you said, it's a 4-part series, which will involve what I would call the theoretical and practical dimensions of the kingship, the king himself, the succession, which is something that happens between the death of the last king and the coronation of the fourth king. So, this is an enormous undertaking for the people who could have constructed the whole institution that Egyptian kingship came to represent. I say that the system of Egyptian kingship is a profound, divinely inspired cosmological construct involving divine and human personalities, philosophic and metaphysical attributes, and religious and spiritual forces, all acting in concert, impacting institutional dynamics in political and social relationships, art and architecture, even trade and navigation, all functioning within the manifestation of Martian principles to actualize truth, justice, and righteousness. The profound expressions of such an experience sustained a civilization for 3,000 years, and it continues to fascinate the modern mindset, baffled by the thought that black men inhabiting the Nile Valley in Northeast Africa could conceive, evolve, and maintain a system of such an encompassing immensity in antiquity, while darkness engulfed and permeated much of the ancient known world. This is the prize African people are today committed to defend, to learn from, and to seek empowerment in their intellectual and social development as Mother Africa's progeny, who can claim this as a legacy to be shared with all humanity. So we claim this is our heritage, but we give it to the world to be a part of and experience it with us. The idea that the king of Egypt was not an individual like mortal other kings of the ancient, even the modern world. See, he was, of course, a god on earth. He was God inspired, God imbued. He was God guided, and he functioned within the parameters of equality, purity, and fairness that a God would manifest. I've said a lot, of course, but in order to have an understanding of ancient Egyptian kingship, a system that lasted 3,000 years and many more in evolution to its formation, it didn't just come about. It's a gradual process that we often wonder. And I'm taking it back to 1991 when I was in Egypt with Dr. Ben Johanan, and there was a minister from Philadelphia. And he said, in essence, that he was asked, how do you go back to your congregation and preach based on what you have seen? And he said, I cannot teach my people there is no God. I can show you where God comes from. Albert Churchward, who was a student of Jeremiah, these are great writers of the last century, he said that the Africans, quote unquote, were having sweet communion with deity for a period of 300,000 years, where they were having these religious experiences. Now, you know, we've talked, when I was a student, we talked about the high church and the low church. You could fall asleep in the high church, but in the low church, they're getting down, and there's music and noise and everything else. So, in essence, then, these people, these Africans along the Nile and Central Africa and what have you, were having these experiences over 300,000 year period. So we noticed that this evolution towards kingship was long in coming. It the unification that took place on the Medes at 3000 BC was the break in the prehistoric, pre-dynastic period to begin a new era. So this is what I'm trying to get at. So the king and himself, so I say that the inquiring mind has to dig deep to examine what can be called theoretical and practical foundations of the institution. You see, so we will look at the king himself and equally the succession, as I said, and the coronation. All this centers on several principal important festivals in which the king played a significant part. These include the Hempstead Festival, which is essentially a festival of rejuvenation, somewhat similar to the coronation, where over a period of time, where time and nature has, quote unquote, weakened the king, he was reinvigorated, rejuvenated, and he could rule again. Generally, it's a 30-year period, but some kings who never ruled for 30 years celebrated it as often as they could, and time and circumstances permitted. The said festival was this rejuvenated. Okay, then you had the Opet Festival, which was a festival in which during the Middle and the New Kingdom, Amun would leave his abode at Karnak Temple and travel to Luxor Temple to be encoached with his wife, the goddess Mut, for a 24-day period where all of his adherents would celebrate this wonderful thing that began at the new year. And then there was the festival of Min, the coming out of Min. Min was the creative principle that generated plant, animal, and human life. And mineral qualities were also part of it. You see, we've got to understand, as Shuala Lubis often likes to say, that we have mineral, animal, plant, and human entities all interacting in the person that we as humans represent. And that is why each one of these seeks to bring out the best in whomever. In earlier exchanges, we've talked about the whole notion of bringing good into the world, and if there were 6 billion people every day trying to do something good, how the world itself would be much better. Okay, so these festivals, and most important, however, it would be the festival of the succession, where between the period when the old king dies and the new king ascends the throne, there is a period of mourning, because the people feel that like an artery in the human body has been cut and the blood is gushing out, and the society is in mourning, and that they have lost this leader, this king, this spiritual force that guides the society, and therefore they're just waiting for the period when the new king would be enthroned, would receive the crowns, would now begin to heal the wounds of the society and move forward towards prosperity, peace, and justice. And all of this here is a part of this idea that these black men who, when the world was in utter darkness, the ignorance of darkness, they sat down and mapped out this and were able to communicate between themselves and divinity. You see, there is a time when sacred space and sacred time could interact, and divine forces can communicate with people. Of course, you have to be in the right frame of mind in terms of purity, goodness, and stuff like that. Okay, so all of this has to do with the king who will rule. that person who sits on the throne. Henry Frankfurt, in his book Kingship and the Gods, elaborates on this phrase in the statement. The future tense evidently suggests the time of transition after the death of the king's predecessor, but before the coronation at Memphis. If we look at the practical as well as the theoretical aspects of the kingship, the practical aspects begin with the unification of the north and the south kingdoms on the means of 3000 BC, where he chose Memphis as his capital and established a temple to worship the god Ptah, because Ptah is thought to be the original creative principle that made everything. He's often listed as the blue-collar god because he was a constructioneer. That is, he created the world, he created the heavens, and he created everything else. And he worked in concert with Thought, who he conceived the things and Thought spoke it. And Thought now also became the god of intellect, of writing, and so forth. So second, it seems that the play was performed, the play of the succession was performed throughout the land. For when the site of the performance is consecrated by a special type of sacrifice, this sacrifice is offered to the god of that town. So the king had to sort of like go to every town and reestablish contact with the forces that he represented in these different things. You know, when we talk about Seth murdering Osiris, he after Isis had found her husband, Seth again found the body, and he cut the body up into 13 pieces and buried it in different locations in the city, in the country. And then Isis had to go and find each piece and establish a temple and establish the consecration of that particular area as a soul force aspect of her husband's totality, right? So the king now had to sort of like perform different ceremonies throughout the country because he was one with everything and everything was one with him. So this
Now, you don't mean 13 temples. He didn't do 13 temples, did he?
no.
13 what?
I use Isis as an example
Yes.
of burial and consecration of a site.
Okay.
But the king had to go to each. He traveled the land. Remember now, in the succession period, it's a 70-day period that the dead king, is going through mummification, and it takes 70 days to mummify the body. So he's got a lot of time, more than 2 months, so he's got to visit everything. You know, he's on his boat. The mode of transportation was the river. So he's on his boat, so he sailed from one city to the next and sit, you know, and visit. Just like how we have our politicians today, Sunday morning, you know, they gone to the church, not so much to pray, but to be seen. You know, oh yes, he was at this church this week, and so they had to do that. Nevertheless, the king was not properly king unless he had enacted the play of the succession and everything else that went with it. Naturally, with this much accomplished, the administration of justice based on the philosophy and the admonition of Mott was equally and tremendously important for this moral ideal in itself, the foundation that supported the whole phenomenal undertaking of pharaonic kingship. This therefore enables us to see the system of ancient Egyptian kingship is considered, certainly by Dr. Ben Carruthers, as the world's only and most perfect form of government. The Shabaka stone, was also called the Memphite theology, was a document which was written on papyrus that was found, and the 25th Ethiopian dynasty king Shabaka rewrote it on stone, and it explained the Egyptian conception of how everything came into being, how the gods created the world, from the council that they held in heaven, and when they debated how they would descend to earth and what they would use in terms of the construction of the universe, the construction of the earth, and the implementation of, as I had said, the mineral, the plant, the animal, and the human life forms that came to inhabit this area. So this is simply because this form of governance was divinely inspired and instituted. That's why he said this is the only form, the only perfect system of government.
Quite interesting.
It's been said that the business of government was actually carried on by a vast body of officials. What do we mean by this? Dr. Jacob Carruthers identified this body of officials as the organization of the national government seemed to include the office of the Niswit, which was the head of the state, the king, the pharaoh, a national council of advisors, the legislature, a national council of advisors, a prime minister, a minister of the treasury, a keeper of the seal, a minister of state affairs, commanders of expeditions and regional and colonial government. These cabinet-level officials were assisted by a host of overseers and petty officials who were promoted according to achievement. What they wanted to say is that even though in the earliest period, most of the high officials was in some way or the other related to the king, they were of the king's line. However, people with ability could rise once their abilities were recognized, so that an individual could come in on the first level, and if he was committed, he was a hard worker, he demonstrated intelligence and leadership skills, he could rise to the highest office in the land. Of course, he couldn't be king because he wasn't on the divine line, but he could become as far as perhaps prime minister, which was second in command. Many men of humble origin could rise to the top once their gifts were recognized. Okay, and he quotes a 6th dynasty official named Uti, who rose from a stable hand to be a judge, to be a governor of the southern lands. And once there was during the 6th dynasty, there was a conspiracy against the king in the harem, because I may have said to you before that all the queens of the harem, well, he had one queen or maybe two, but he had a whole parcel of harem women, and most of them had a child, and each one of them wondered, why is it her child and not my child is the heir apparent to be the next king? So there was some intrigue going on. And in this case, in the 6th dynasty, there was some intrigue against the king, and the king appointed this man who rose from humble beginnings because he had intellect and talent, leadership, and what have you, to hear the case. Even the prime minister or the vizier didn't have that, was not invited to be a part of that. He was to go in there and listen and find out and determine on his own who were the conspirators and so forth. Okay. To underscore that, it's been said that that highest position, which is the vizier, which is the prime minister, right? The head of the treasury has no son. The master of the seal has no heir. The scribe is chosen for his hand. His office has no children. We know that talent, especially craft skills, pass from father to son, and so to offices. But it didn't mean that these were the only avenues of which elevation in the social order could take place. Thought. I mentioned the role that thought played as the god of writing, intellect, knowledge, music, and what have you. He was always being called upon to bless those who believed in and worked to furtherance of the system. So he was invoked in the text of the 20th dynasty that said essentially, Jehuti, the Prime Minister and Chief Justice, Jehuti, the messenger of Ra, Jehuti, the powerful of Tawi, Jehuti, who puts all things in their place. Again, in the later New Kingdom text, he's called upon. He says, come to me, Jehuti, O letter writer of the plural gods. Make me skillful in your calling, writing. Your calling is better than all callings. It makes men great. He who masters it is found to fit to hold office. Skill, intellect. We tell the young people, go to school, learn the skills, not to get a job, but learn how to think so that you can learn how to decode your environment and move towards what I call intellectual autonomy. So you can meet any challenge and work it out in your mind. It makes men great. He who masters it found fit to hold office. I have seen many whom you have helped. They are among the 30, which is the council. The council is the great body of men of intellect and high moral authority. We don't find that often in today's
days.
society. The Prime Minister of the Fifth Dynasty, Tahotep, said that he established the philosophy of governance. That is to say, if you become a leader, commanding plans of the many, seek out every excellent occasion. Let not your governance be wrong. Mart is great and enduring. It has not been confounded since the time of Wosir, the beginning, when everything started. In the end, Mart endures. A man may say, it is my father's property. That is to say that if you're doing good, good always triumphs over evil, irrespective. Now, those are some of the aspects of the theological or theoretical foundations, but there are the practical foundations, which, when means in 3000 BC established the kingship of Egypt by uniting the land and proclaiming Upper and Lower Egypt. But what has happened, and we have to be careful in how we view this, because oftentimes the notion of who these people were has been said that the Egyptians were ancient, were Caucasians who came from Southwest Asia, ascended the Nile. So the fact that there was a northern and southern kingdom, many of the preachers of falsity have argued that the north preceded the south. The north was more prominent, but that is not how it's been really, and that's why we've got to learn how to read not simply the text on the line. We have to read below the line. We have to read above the line. We have to read to the side of the line, and then we have to read between the lines. So that you can have all the information. There was a New York disc jockey, radio personality really, his name is Gary Bird. He said that the information you don't have could kill you, which means that you have to have all the information. My professor used to say, make sure you get that last reference so that you have a more fuller report when you submit for your grade. So you got to know everything so that you will really know what's going on. Okay. So Egyptian kingship emerged at the end of the pre-dynastic period on the Narma, where you unite north and south. On this, the Egyptians were well aware. They recognized the first king of the first dynasty means. Tradition named as his successor the semi-divine. So what we have is that there are levels of interaction in the construction of the order of the society. We have the gods, we have the demigods, we have the mains, we have the king, and we have the king, the nobles, and the lower people. So there are 5 levels of people interacting in the creation of the society, and everybody seeking to lift up each other in whether it's intellectually, morally, spiritually, and so forth. I mean, that's why you see they were so religious. Now, if you can envision 1,500 temples, we're not talking about shrines in your house where you say your prayer, what have you. But imagine there's a great African nation at prayer, calling upon divine forces to bless themselves, the society, and humanity in general. We got a powerful soul force at work here. And this is what Africa's people have bequeathed to the world, that we must continue. So that in 1922, Casey Hayford said that the world has become so mechanical. It's only the philosophical nature and the spiritual well-being of the Africans will save humanity from its impending destruction. That's some of what I
We
wanted to
thank you.
discuss.
What a wonderful introduction to the kingship, the system. We thank you, Dr. Munderson,
Oh,
and
yes,
looking
Sister.
forward to part 2. And we
yes.
thank you for watching 1001 Ways to Cope with Stress. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You look beautiful
Wow.
yourself.
Thank you so much.
In
Thank
your
you.
hair tie, your
And I
match